Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Coachman after a long wait. I am your humble host, Omar John Ori II, and thank you for coming back. I know it has been a very long time. There have been a lot of changes, not only of the podcast, but just of my life in general, and a lot of good ones, and still, like, the year's not over, so hopefully, a lot of good changes for what's coming up as well. So, with that being said, to start off season 4, which I never thought I would ever get to, season 4, episode 1, I'm actually going to read you a really cool story from India, and I would like to dedicate this to my, I guess you could say my only guest, yeah, Miss Daisy, because she loves India. And also, I would like to shout out to a very small young Indian little lad just born here in Carson City. I don't know the young lad's name, but I do know I was here before the little one was being thought of. But yeah, I just want to let this go out to those two, and hopefully, Daisy, you enjoy this reading, and thank you for all the inspiration. So, with that being said, today's story is going to be the the Kabuliwala by Rabindranath Tagore, and it's a lovely story that consists of primarily a little girl named Minnie and a gentleman named Raman. And hopefully by the end of this story, like, honestly, you can see that, like, love, it it has, like, no bounds at all, and it comes in many shapes, sizes, and forms. So with that being said, let's get into the story. My 5-year-old my 5-year-old daughter, Minnie, cannot live without chattering. I really believe that in all her life she has not wasted a minute in silence. Her mother is often vexed at this, and would stop her prattle, but I would not. Excellent father. Minnie, Minnie, sorry, to see Minnie quiet is unnatural, and I cannot bear it long. And so my own talk with her is always lively. And if I had a kid, I'm telling you, I would just chatter with my kid all day, every day, about whatever. I don't care. Talk about the grass growing. One morning, for instance, when I was in the midst of the 17th chapter of my new novel, my little Minnie stole into the room, putting her hand into mine, and said, "Father, Ramdayal, the doorkeeper, calls a crow, meaning a C to a K. He doesn't know anything, does he?" Very stereotypical child question. And if you haven't ever been around a 4-year-old, trust me, stick around them, dude. They ask about 399 more in a whole day. Before I could explain to her the difference of language in this world, she was embarked on the full tide of another project. "What do you think, father? Bahala says there is an elephant in the clouds, blowing water out of his trunk, and and that it's rain." Sounds fair. And then, darting off anew, while I sat still making ready some reply to the last, saying, "Father, what relation is mother to you?" One of the worst questions that you would ever want a little one to ask. If you don't know why, trust me, you'll find out. With a grave face, I contrived to say, "Go and play with Bahala, Minnie. I am busy." The window of my room overlooks the road. The child had seated herself at my feet near my table, and was playing softly, drumming on her knees. I was hard at work on my 17th chapter, where Pratap Singh, the hero, had just caught Kanchatlata, that's a hard one, the heroine, in his arms, and was about to escape with her by the third-story window of the castle, when all of a sudden Minnie left her play and ran to the window, crying, "A Kabuliwala! A Kabuliwala!" Sure enough, in the street below was a Kabuliwala, passing slowly along. He wore the loose, soiled clothing of his people, with a tall turban. There was a bag on his back, and he carried boxes of grapes in his hands. Now, Kabuliwala in the 19th century, I think this was, it was actually, it was defined as a man that was literally like it was the way that people from Calcutta described an Afghan trader who traveled east to sell dried fruits, nuts, and small goods. And they often went door to door. So basically, like these guys, they were kind of like your door to door salesman of like selling, like, I don't know, diapers or knives or whatever you want to say. So that's kind of what these guys did, except, instead of a briefcase, they just had a sack on their back. So I cannot tell what were my daughter's feelings at the sight of this man, but she began to call him loudly. Ah, I thought, he will come in, and my 17th chapter will never be finished. At which that exact moment, the Kabuliwala turned and looked up at the child. When she saw this, overcome by terror, she fled to her mother's protection and disappeared. She had a blind belief that inside the bag, which the big man carried, there were perhaps 2 or 3 other children like herself. The peddler, meanwhile, entered my doorway and greeted me with a smiling face. So precarious was the position of my hero and my heroine that my first impulse was to stop and buy something. Since the man had been called, I made some small purchases and a conversion began about Abdurrahman, the Russians, the English, and the frontier policy. And just to let you know, this is around like the 1800s. So this is pretty far back and pretty early in history. So it's probably like colonial days and things like that. I don't know much about Indian history, but anybody who would like to let me kind of like, learn me on that one, by all means, I will take the learning. As he was about to leave, he asked, "And where is the little girl, sir?" And I, thinking that Minnie must get rid of her false fear, had her brought out. She stood by my chair and looked at the Kabuliwala and his bag. He offered her nuts and raisins, but she would not be tempted, and only clung the closer to me, with all their doubts increased. This was their first meeting. One morning, however, not many days later, as I was leaving the house, I was startled to find Minnie seated on a bench near the door, laughing and talking, with the great Kabuliwala at her feet. In all her life, it appeared, my small daughter had never found so patient a listener, save her father, and I know it saved his ears. And already the corner of her little sari was stuffed with almonds and raisins, the gift of her visitor. "Why did you give her those?" I said, and taking out an 8 anna bit, I handed it to him. The man accepted the money without demur and slipped it into his pocket. So just to let you know, that an anna was an old Indian coin, and so 8 annas is equal to about half of a modern day rupee, pre-decimal era. So, like as you can tell, this is a pretty old story, but yeah. So 8 annas is, I want to say, about equivalent to like 4 rupees. Wait, no. Oh wait, no, 8 annas is equal to about half of 1 rupee today. So yeah, so it was pretty cheap, but I guess back then that was, pretty decent money. And alas, on my return an hour later, I found the unfortunate coin had made twice its own worth of trouble, for the Kabuliwala had given it to Minnie, and her mother, catching sight of the bright round object, had pounced on the child with, "Where did you get that 8 anna bit?" "The Kabuliwala gave it to me," said Minnie cheerfully. "The Kabuliwala gave it to you?" cried her mother, and much shocked. "Oh, Minnie, how could you take it from him?" I, entering at the moment, saved her from impending disaster and proceeded to make my own inquiries. I gotta say, that one question, "How could you take it from him?" honestly, I've been doing a lot of research on just literally communication between men and women, and that question alone, I can totally understand it now, and it totally makes me laugh. Not in a bad way. It just makes me laugh, like knowing what I know. But I digress. So it was not the first or second time I found that the two had met. The Kabuliwala had overcome the child's first terror by a judicious bribery of nuts and almonds, and the two were now great friends. I'm telling you, you can bribe a kid with any kind of sweet or treat, it's over. Yeah, that's why you should tell them to stay away from white vans and puppies and shit like that. They had many quaint jokes, which offered them much amusement. Seated in front of him, looking down on his gigantic frame in all her tiny dignity, Minnie would ripple her face with laughter and begin. Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala, what have you got in your bag? And he would reply in the nasal accents of the mountaineer, an elephant. Not much caused merriment, perhaps, but how they both enjoyed the fun. And for me, the child's talk with a grown-up man had always in it something strangely fascinating. To be honest, it is fascinating when you get somebody watching a child just like have a really actual conversation, not a kiddie conversation, but an actual conversation. It's actually pretty cool and pretty fun. Then the Kabuliwala, not to be behindhand, would take his turn. Well, little one, and when are you going to the father-in-law's house? So, just to let you know, this is, I would say, like, I don't know if it's common practice today, but I did do a little bit, and this is kind of like a very like old tradition, and it's a father cut. So, and in traditional Indian culture, a married woman would often move into her husband's parents' home, and this is why the story mentions the father-in-law's house as part of the family. And you'll start to understand like why he asked this question, but this one little question is kind of like, I would say it's a really cool dynamic because he's asking a very relevant question. And I think he's asking more than just, hey, when are you going to, go do this? There's a lot deeper meaning, but I think it's deeper meaning for him and not necessarily the little girl, but you'll see. Now, most small Bengali maidens have heard long ago about the father-in-law's house, but we, being a little newfangled, had kept these things from our child, and Minnie at the question must have been a trifle bewildered. But she, would not show it, and with ready tact replied, "Are you going there?" Great question from a kid. Amongst men of the Kabuliwala's class, however, it is well known that the world's father-in-law's houses have a double meaning. It is a euphemism for jail, the place where we are well cared for, at no expense to ourselves. In this sense, will the sturdy peddler take my daughter's question? Ah, he would say, shaking his fist at an invisible policeman, I will thrash my father-in-law. Hearing this and picturing the poor discomfited relative, Minnie would go off into peals of laughter in which her formidable friend would join. I think if you can't see already what's kind of happening, like it's like they're kind of like building a bond over like a question that even though she doesn't understand, he's joking, but yet he's kind of like introducing it to her, which is I think is really a really cool idea. These were autumn mornings, the very time of year when kings of old went forth to conquest, and I, never stirring from my little corner in Calcutta, would let my mind wander over the whole world. At the very name of another country, my heart would go out to it, and at sight of a foreigner in the streets, I would fall a weaving a network of dreams, the mountains, the glens, and the forest of this distant home, with his cottage in his setting, and the free and independent life of faraway wilds. Perhaps the scenes of travel conjure themselves up before me and pass and repass in my imagination all the more vividly, because I had led such a vegetable existence that I called to travel would fall upon me like a thunderbolt. In the presence of this Kabuliwala, I was immediately transported to the foot of arid mountain peak with narrow little belfries twisting in and out amongst their towering heights. I could see the string of camels bearing the merchandise, and the company of turbaned merchants carrying some of their queer old firearms, and some their spears, journeying downward towards the plain, I could see. But at some point, Minnie's mother would intervene, imploring me to beware of that man. Understandable. You got it. He does look like a ruffian, but still. Minnie's mother is unfortunately a very timid lady. Whenever she hears a noise in the street or sees people coming towards the house, she always jumps to the conclusion that they are either thieves or drunkards or snakes or tigers or malaria or cockroaches or caterpillars. Even after all these years of experience, she is not able to overcome her terror. She was full of doubts about the Kabuliwala and used to beg me to keep a watchful eye on him. I tried to laugh her fear gently away, but then she would turn around on me seriously and ask me solemn questions. Were children never kidnapped? Was it then not true that there was slavery in Kabul? Was it so very absurd that this big man should be able to carry off a tiny child? Very good questions, but very irrelevant. I urged that though not impossible, it was highly improbable. But this was not enough, and her dread persisted. As it was indefinite, however, it did not seem right to forbid the man the house, and the intimacy went on unchecked. Once a year in the middle of January, Rahman, the Kabuliwala, was in the habit of returning to his country. And as the time approached, he would be very busy going from house to house collecting his debts. This year, however, he could always find time to come and see Minnie. It would have seemed to an outsider that there was some conspiracy between the two, for when he could not come in the morning, he would appear in the evening. Even to me, it was a little startling now and then, in the corner of a dark room, suddenly to surprise this tall, loose-garmented, much bebadged man. But when Minnie would run in smiling with her "O Kabuliwala, O Kabuliwala," and the two friends, so far apart at age, would subside into their old laughter and their old jokes, I felt reassured. One morning, a few days before he had made up his mind to go, I was correcting my proof sheets in my study. It was a chilly weather. Through the window, the rays of sun touched my feet, and the slight warmth was very welcome. It was almost 8 o'clock, and the early pedestrians were returning home with their heads covered. All at once I heard an uproar in the street, and looking out saw Rahman being led away, bound between two policemen, and behind them a crowd of curious boys. There were bloodstains on the clothes of the Kabuliwala, and one of the policemen carried a knife. Hurrying out, I stopped him and inquired what it all meant. Partly from one, partly from another, I gathered that a certain neighbor had owed the peddler something for a Rampuri shawl, but had falsely denied having bought it, and that in the course of the quarrel, Rahman had struck him. So, a Rampuri shawl is like a handcrafted woolen shawl made in Rampur, India, and these shawls were finely woven and considered of high quality. So basically, I guess it's almost like kind of like a head wrap, I guess if you want to call it, or like something that goes over your arm, but it's like a really, 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 really fine quality. So it looks like, basically somebody's just trying to say, yo, my man's saying I got this, but I don't. Like, I didn't buy this, and he stole it from me, or whatever it is. So it's kind of bad, but it kind of sticks. It kind of sucks. Now in the heat of his excitement, the prisoner began calling his enemy all sorts of names, when suddenly, in the veranda of my house, appeared my little Minnie with her usual exclamation, "O Kabuliwala, O Kabuliwala!" Rahman's face lighted up as he turned to her. He had no bag under his arm today, so she could not discuss the elephant with him. She at once therefore proceeded to the next question. Are you going to the father-in-law's house? Rahman laughed and said, just where I'm going, little one. Then seeing that the reply did not amuse the child, he held up his fettered hands. Ah, he said, I would have thrashed that old father-in-law, but my hands are bound. On a charge of murderous assault, Rahman was sentenced to some years imprisonment. So as you can see, like notice how like their joke is kind of starting to evolve. But hold on, they're not done with their little trick. It's not done. It's not done. But I hope you're seeing how it's changing. Time passed away, and he was not remembered. The accustomed work in the accustomed place was ours, and the thought of once free mountaineer spending his years in prison seldom or never occurred to us at all. Even my light-hearted Minnie, I am ashamed to say, forgot her old friend. New companions filled her life as she grew older. She spent more of her time with girls. So much time, indeed, did she spend with them that she came no more, as she used to do, to her father's room. I was scarcely on speaking terms with her. Years had passed away. It was once more autumn, and we had made arrangements for our Minnie's marriage. It was to take place during the Puja holidays, with Durga returning to Kailash. The light of our home um was also about to depart was to depart to her husband's house and leave her father's in the shadow. So just to give you a little history real quick is so this puja holidays it's it when I started looking it up, it was a really cool, so it's a 10-day celebration that takes place in the Bengali month of Push, and it's tied to like the harvest season and winter traditions. So it would almost be kind of like how I guess if you want to say, imagine like Thanksgiving, but like 10 days, and then like kind of it's all about like it's kind of about the food, but imagine like a 10-day Thanksgiving. That's kind of like equivalent to from what my understanding. If I'm wrong, please help me out, and in addition, the Durga Puja, that is the most that's kind of like no, that's all. We'll just leave it there. Okay. Yeah, we'll just leave it there for now. Sorry. Almost right ahead of myself. But the morning was bright, and the morning was bright. After the rains, there was a sense of ablution in the air, and the sun rays looked like pure gold. So bright were they that they gave a beautiful radiance even to the sordid brick walls of Calcutta lanes. Since early dawn that day, the wedding pipes had been sounding, and at each beat my own heart throbbed. The wail of the tune, Bharavi, seemed to intensify my pain at the approaching separation. My Minnie was to be married that night. I ain't gonna lie, I gotta give a lot of pops like I can see why a lot of dads cry at their daughter's wedding. It's just like, yo, you're watching like your little one, be like, all right, I'm out, deuces. So I can really get that. Um, So from early morning noise and bustle had pervaded the house. In the courtyard, the canopy had been slung on its bamboo poles. The chandeliers, with their tinkling sound, must be hung in each room and veranda. There was no end of hurry and excitement. I was sitting in my study, looking through the accounts, when someone entered, saluting respectfully, and stood before me. It was Rahman, the Kabuliwala. At first, I did not recognize him. He had no bag, nor the long hair, nor the same vigor that he used to have. But he smiled, and I knew him again. When did you come, Rahman? I asked. Last evening, he said. I was released from jail. The words struck harsh upon my ears. I had never before talked with one who wounded his fellow, and my heart shrank within itself. I realized this far, for I felt that the day would have been better omen, better omened had he not turned up. I gotta say, I can understand where I can understand where the dad's going with this, but still, it's kind of like bittersweet, I guess, if you could say. There are ceremonies going on, I said, and I am busy. Could you perhaps come another day? At once he turned to go, but as he reached the door, he hesitated and said, "May I not see the little one, sir, for a moment?" It was his belief that Minnie was still the same. He had pictured her running. He had pictured her running to him as she used to, calling, "Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala." He had imagined, too, that they would laugh and talk together, just as of old. In fact, in memory of former days, he had brought, carefully wrapped up in a paper, a few almonds and raisins and grapes, obtained somehow from a countryman, for his own little fund was dispersed. I said again, "There is a ceremony in the house, and you will not be able to see anyone today." The man's face fell. He looked wistfully at me for a moment, then said, "Good morning," and went out. I know, sounds wild, but sometimes cultural difference. Good morning when you're out, whatever. I felt a little sorry and would have called him back, but I found he was returning of his own accord. He came close up to me, holding out his offerings with the words, "I brought these few things, sir, for the little one. Will you give them to her?" I took them and was going to pay him, but he caught my hand and said, "You are very kind, sir. Keep me in your recollection. Do not offer me money. You have a little girl. I too have one like her in my own home. I think of her and bring fruits to your child, not to make a profit for myself." Saying this, he put his hand inside his big, loose robe, and brought out a small and dirty piece of paper. With great care, he unfolded this and smothered it out. And he smoothed it out with both hands on my table. It bore the impression of a little hand, not a photograph, not a drawing, just the impression of an ink-smeared hand laid flat on the paper. This touch of his own little daughter had been always on his heart, as he had come year after year to Calcutta to sell his wares in the streets. Tears came to his eyes. I forgot that he was a poor Kabuli fruit seller, while I was. But no, what was I more than he? He also was a father. Very crucial, and I like how my man stopped himself. Yo, men are men. There's a rule between us, and like, yo, when a man has a daughter, and so do you. I'm sorry, it's always recognized. It's like that's like a brotherhood that nobody knows about, unless you're there. I sent for many. Oh, okay. Oh, that impression of the little hand of his little Parbati in her distant mountain home reminded me of my own little Minnie. I sent for Minnie immediately from the inner apartment. Many difficulties were raised, but I would not listen. Clad in the red silk of her wedding day, with the sandal paste on her forehead, and adorned as a young bride, Minnie came and stood bashfully before me. The Kabuliwala looked a little staggered at the apparition. He could not revive their old friendship. At last he smiled and said, "Little one, are you going to your father-in-law's house?" But Minnie now understood the meaning of the word father-in-law, and she could not reply to him as of old. She flushed up at the question and stood before him with her bride-like face turned down. I remember the day when the Kabuliwala and my Minnie had first met, and I felt sad. When she had gone, Raman heaved a deep sigh and sat down on the floor. The idea had suddenly come to him that his daughter, too, must have grown in this long time, and that he would have to make friends with her anew. Assuredly, he would not find her as he used to know her, and besides, what might not have happened to her in those 8 years. The marriage pipe sounded, and the mild autumn sun streamed round us. But Raman sat in the little Calcutta lane and saw before him the barren mountains of Afghanistan. I took out a banknote and gave it to him, saying, "Go back to your own daughter, Raman, in your own country, and may the happiness of your meeting bring good fortune to my child." Having made this present, I heard to curtail some of the festivities. I could not have the electric lights I had intended, nor the military band, and the ladies of the house were despondent at it. But to me, the wedding feast was all the brighter for the thought that in the distant land, a long lost father met again with his own child. So as you can see, that's why I said that, for me, I really enjoyed this story just because it shows, that love, it doesn't have age, it doesn't have boundaries, it doesn't have but it just evolves. And so, from the Kabuliwala, you're looking at a man far from her home, a girl full of questions, and her father coming to terms with how quickly daughters grow up. And what struck me behind the soft ache of the ending was how Tagore used his short tale to talk about exile, memory, and manhood. Raman wasn't just selling dried fruit; he was carrying the weight of lost time, a daughter of his own, and a quiet kind of hope. In a world quick to divide people by borders, language, and skin, this story reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen between those who were never meant to meet. So, with that being said, I'm the coachman, and if this story moves you, pass it on. And, don't forget to, tell somebody and have some fun, just bring this story to light, especially if you have a father who actually has a daughter. Highly recommend it. But yeah, but that's for the story for today. And as always, until next time, take care.